Greetings dear viewers, this is George from Ireland, and in this video I'm going to elucidate my opinion that the statue of Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville ought to remain in situ. First of all, who was Robert E. Lee? In case you don't know, he was a general in the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. That's 1861 to 65, and this was when some of the southern states of the United States broke away because the white majority there feared that the African American majority might be allowed freedom. The federal government might abolish slavery in all states, say it was no longer a federal issue. So let me first of all make this disclaimer. I recognize that slavery was satanic. It was a hideously cruel thing to enslave anyone. Slaves were most barbarously treated. Slavery was the most frank form of exploitation. It's utterly despicable. People have been kidnapped in Africa, taken in the most appallingly inhumane conditions across the Atlantic. Many of them died on the way. Slavery was just hideous. People were whipped and tortured. Women were raped on an industrial scale. So it was repulsive. Slavery is nothing to be proud of. It's something deeply disgusting and shameful to enslave anyone. I am not a white supremacist. I recognize that white supremacy is repugnant. I have no white pride. I'm indifferent to my skin tone. It's not a big part of my identity. So why do I think the statue ought to be there? Well, for many reasons. Partly it's artwork. I know it could be displayed in a museum and still be artwork there. And partly because I don't want to erase history. He was a very significant figure, even though I recognize he fought for a filthy cause. People are also multidimensional. Now, Robert E. Lee owned slaves himself, owned human beings. So to that extent, he was a very wicked man. People can, in other aspects of their lives, be quite good, could be physically courageous, could be a good family man, but I know all that's cancelled out by the unmitigated evil of keeping people in bondage. And then he helped found what's now Washington and Lee College in Virginia afterwards. Now, I've heard it said that when there were some black undergraduates there, he insisted they be allowed to attend church with the others. Now, I'm not sure that anecdote is true, actually. He said that slavery is an evil in any society, but I cannot turn my hand against Virginia. His loyalty to was to his state and not to human freedom, in which case he would have wanted to abolish slavery. Now, if he recognized slavery was repulsive, he ought to have granted manumission to these people he was denying freedom to, and he believed in firmness. He authorized people to be whipped. Imagine that. People's bare skin being whipped just because they were not being exploited enough by him. So the Confederacy was not a worthy cause. Other reasons to have it up. So it recognizes history for good or ill. This happened. And also, where will it lead? Who's next? So people point out that the founding fathers of the United States, many of them were slaveholders. So they were advancing freedom through the American Revolution, but they were also denying any liberty to people who they held in servitude. Which was obviously contemptible. Washington, he forced slaves to work when it was very cold, too cold for him to go outside, forced a very elderly woman in her 80s to do heavy physical labor. So in that respect, he was grossly unethical. But okay, we judge people by their time, and his racist attitudes were widely shared back then. The trouble is, we'd have to remove all statues of people like that, monarchs or presidents in various countries. Pursued policies we now recognize are very unfair. So nobody prior to the abolition of slavery, unless that person was an abolitionist, can have his or her statue around. Nothing can be named in honor of these people. Virginia is named after Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, and she authorized slavery. Does the state of Virginia have to be renamed? So it's absurd just to try and wipe out history like that. So I know that many people find the presence of Lee's statue grossly offensive. Exalting these Confederate generals seems to be a standing insult to the African American community. One might say that, well, he was certainly a traitor, Lee. He had been in the US Army. He then fought against the United States. Surely his primary loyalty should be to the United States and not Virginia. It would be like putting up a statue of Hirohito at Pearl Harbor. Now, I know Hirohito was not an American. He at least wasn't a traitor. Even though he was fighting against the United States, he was Japanese, as he's entitled to fight against the United States. But he authorized many savage atrocities. Or perhaps a statue of bin Laden in New York, outside where the World Trade Center used to be, because he was a deadly enemy of America, and he deliberately massacred civilians. Now, I wouldn't want a statue of these people up. But anyway, the Robert E. Lee statue already is up, and a considerable minority of people in Virginia at least want it there. I don't wish to be associated with people who are very pro-statue, some of them in the Ku Klux Klan, and have utterly rebarbative opinions. A lot of the anti-statue protesters are decent people. I happen not to share their opinion on this one. Some of them are far left, so I'd have little truck with them. So for reasons of art and history, I would prefer the statue to remain there. It's not an emotive issue for me. I'm not an American. It wouldn't be terrible to remove it. It could be balanced with signs explaining just how wicked slavery is. The trouble is some people actually need that to be explained to them. It was an unmitigated, wicked thing to do. And I've heard people try and defend it so that it was somehow good for the slaves. It's a repulsive argument. Those people who think slavery was somehow even a tiny bit acceptable should become slaves themselves, especially whites. Enslave yourselves and give yourselves to African Americans as slaves if you really think that thraldom is in any way pleasant. So some people want to defend this Lee statue because it's their heritage. Now, one's heritage is not always good. If my ancestor committed a monstrous crime, that is still a crime. It's not a good thing just because it happens to be my ancestor. Family solidarity can go too far. And African American people, they also have their family heritage to think about. What was in their family tree? People suffering grievously, being abused in the cruelest possible manner. So slavery was savage. Now, so many statues of these Confederate leaders have been removed, it's probable that by the bicentenary of the Confederacy, none of them will be left. The fascinating thing is how a lot of these statues went up about the time of the First World War, so that was as the Confederate Army generation was dying off. And then in the 60s, partly as a centenary of the Confederacy, that's why many statues were erected, and I suppose as a riposte to the civil rights movement, because many racists didn't want racial equality. I certainly do want racial equality. Anyway, so people long ago did things that we consider were wicked, and we have to have some historical perspective on this and to judge people as people of their time. As I say, it wouldn't be dreadful if his statue was taken away. If it advanced race relations, then it might be worth it. And if it is removed, I wouldn't agitate for it to be replaced. Other things, it could be balanced by statues of various African American heroes or abolitionists, even white ones, or slave rebels who are the real freedom fighters.